Okay, thanks everyone for coming back. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got one more session for today called Manager Stories, and I'll turn it over to Elizabeth at this time to go ahead and introduce this session.
Great, thanks everybody. So this session is really designed to give the management perspective on this intersection between invasive species and climate change, and then discuss current management strategies and challenges in this area. We have 5 presentations for you today. First up, we have Heather Baldwin from USGS, who's working on annual brome species. Heather, are you ready to go?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Awesome, you should be able to share your screen. Awesome.
Okay. So if
There we go, we see the slides now.
You see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, all of my screens blink. Okay, so everything's fine.
Okay.
Right? You can see, okay.
Yes.
All right, so hi, I'm gonna share a little bit about the development and implementation of the annual brome adaptive management project, also known as ABAM. It is a partnership between USGS and the National Park Service, and it is it expands 4 states. It includes 7 National Park Service units and their associated fire programs and inventory and plant management teams. This means that, and also 2 inventory monitoring networks. So this offered up a lot of data to develop management plan. So these parks have similar grassland types. I'm sorry, can you see my screen or the actual slides? Because I have some animation and I don't know what you see.
We see the actual PowerPoint window. If you want to go and get into the slideshow, that's probably where we'll see the animations.
I thought I did.
There we go. Yep.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Okay, so all of the parks have similar grassland communities, and they all have concerns about increased invasion of exotic annual grasses, particularly cheatgrass and Japanese brome. A lot of the data were summarized in 2016, and it's shown here in a figure. You can see that there's a wide range of invasion across the parks. But the most notable thing is that over time, there's been an increase in invasion, particularly in some of the parks that have more pristine habitats. The study also found that in association with this increased invasion, there's a decrease in species diversity, which of course is hallmark to high quality prairie. These parks also sustain large grazing species. And so the bromes are poor forage, at least later in their life cycle. And the parks are also known for these beautiful view sheds. And here's an example of a heavily invaded area in Badlands National Park. So clearly this is a big concern to the parks in the area. So we used a structured decision-making approach to this problem, which basically just means it's a set of steps to frame a decision. And adaptive management is a type of structured decision-making where the objectives are clear, but the science is fairly uncertain. So adaptive management has 4 steps, essentially. One is that the stakeholders need to define what a desired condition is, right? And then you compare your current state to your desired state or condition. And you have this great decision support tool that suggests an optimal management action. The action is implemented, monitoring data are collected, and the cycle begins again. So we knew that this problem warranted adaptive management And so we needed to get started. So in 2017, there was a workshop with representatives from several of the parks and their management groups, programs, and they essentially outlined the problem formally. And that got us going on developing the decision support tool. So the decision support tool is a state transition based net. It basically is a way of assessing a current condition, and it makes predictions of a future condition. And those future conditions can be influenced by environmental variables and management actions. This was all built specifically from inventory and monitoring data in the parks, which spans back to about 20 years. And this was really high quality, detailed data. The model also makes these predictions over different time periods into the future. And by that utility node, that blue node, that was a way for us to account for individual park preferences, as well as management costs. So it's a way to balance competing objectives. So the model it utilizes machine learning, so it can improve predictions over time as new data come in. It does well with small sample sizes, and we worked with our stakeholders throughout this entire process. The model considers 10 different management actions. However, the data available from park monitoring only included 3, so none in fall and spring burns, as well as summer wildfires too, but we don't actually want to prescribe summer burns, right, in the Northern Great Plains. So, so the uncertainty comes in with the rest of the management actions, and they primarily involve burn only, herbicide only, or burn herbicide combinations. And grazing is not included in this mix because grazing was not seen as a feasible option, management option in the parks, right? It had more to do with logistics. And I think someone's going to talk about grazing in a later presentation. I think Dana will. So the parks we actually currently don't have very much data on these herbicide applications in the parks, especially on a management unit scale. But the parks are working diligently to apply those in small areas now to inform the model so that we can improve our predictions and confidence as we get this framework rolling through time. So we had this great model, we were pleased with it, we were ready to implement it, but it's kind of, you know, that's a heavy lift. So we had another structured decision-making exercise or workshop focused on implementation. There were 3 emerging themes: to maximize collaboration, share our work, and make it easy. So I'm sure this happens in lots of places. It has in my experience. All the folks who are associated with management don't always talk to each other, right? And that's what's happening in the parks. The fire folks would meet at one time with the parks, the IPMT would meet at a different time of year, and so on. And so we thought, this is kind of a no-brainer. We just kind of all have to talk about management at the same time together. So we formalized this with we call it NGP CALM. You have to have an acronym, but basically it's a collaborative adaptive landscape management. And so we have one meeting with all the parks together to kind of talk about how we could pool resources, right? And another one for every individual park. And so we customize all of our data from the respective programs to that specific park and talk specifically with the park about management planning. There are several people involved with this work. And so a lot of us put together different ways that we could reach out and talk about our work. And we thought that this was maybe a good example of how the Park Service could do business, you know, could maybe increase collaboration and data-driven collaboration specifically in other parts of the country and other networks and such. And then our model is complicated, right? There's lots of inputs, monitoring data. Some of it is cleaner than others when it comes in. And so we've worked with the Park Service to develop a workflow that's facilitated by a customized R package. And we also led training sessions with several park staff to learn how to use it. And then produced a lot of resource materials, because Park Service has, like a lot of agencies, have a lot of high turnover, and adaptive management is a long-term program. And so it needs to be transferable over time. So. All right. So here's an example of a slide from a part of those park level meetings. So basically, so we have these nice, pretty automated reports that are generated from ABAM output, and every program associated with management have their data to contribute. And so basically we create this template of a presentation for every park. And Fire has a few slides, IPMT have a few slides, ABAM has a few slides, parks have a few slides. We all bring up what we think is important for management in the parks in the near future. And here's an example of a summary table where there's a lot of ABAM data, or output, but also forest fuels data, right? Because it's not just all about the grasslands. We have to, sometimes it's good to kind of put all this data together to plan management in the parks. But it's not all bison and valleys. There are difficulties associated with applying management in the parks, quite a bit actually. And it's also difficult to maintain an adaptive management program because it's not just a project, it's a long-term effort. And it requires continued support. However, establishing this collaboration has really allowed it to continue despite lots of hurdles over the past few years. And so we're pretty proud of that. And I think I'm right on time for 10 minutes. So I'll close there. And I think we're doing questions later. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, we will ask that you hold all questions till the end. If you want to put them in the chat, that is a-okay, and then you can answer them as they come in through the chat.
Okay, great.
Right,
thank you
so much, Heather.
Yep, thank you.
All right, next up, we have Dennis Longknife Jr., who's from the Fort Belknap Indian community in Montana, which is home of the Nakota and Ania nations. Dennis, are you going to share your screen? Awesome. Looks like you're muted, Dennis.
Yes, I'm just trying to find a slideshow. Just to start.
Yeah, from beginning. Awesome, that should work.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yep, we can see your slides.
Okay, I'll start. I don't know how long it's going to take to go through this, but I'll try to go as quick as I can. And well, here we go. The Fort Belknap Indian Reservation is home to the Grovot and Assiniboine tribes, which we call ourselves the Aninin and Nakota nations. We're located 43 miles south of the Canadian border. The reservation is just over 700,000 acres, which is basically 28 miles by 35 miles wide. We have currently over 7,000 enrolled members. The land is mostly rolling plains with the Milk River Valley as our northern boundary and the Little Rocky Mountains, which make up the southern boundary. And you can see it here on the map. We're right below Saskatchewan. Yeah. Fort Belknap is also home of the Winters Doctrine. It was a landmark water case in the 1908, which was pivotal in determining reserved water rights for tribes. The Fort Belknap tribes pursued the case because non-Indian settlers began diverting and using water on the Milk River for their own purposes. Here's the cover to the presentation. I'm also, the climate change program that I run was originally developed to develop a climate adaptation plan for our community. So it's currently in draft form, and this summer we hope to have the executive summary done so I can share that with you guys. Bison management and native grasslands. The last of the great bison herds began disappearing in this area in the late 1800s. Evidence of how we lived in harmony with the bison is scattered around our landscape. I love going out to this area of Snake Butte. We see a lot of evidence in the form of ancient bison jumps, wallows, petroglyphs, teepee rings, bison bones, and stone tools used to make arrowheads, hide scrapers, spear points, that kind of stuff. Our tribe began returning the bison to our prairies in the 1970s. And now we have over 600 bison. That includes herds from the Great Plains region, where we got some of the buffalo in South Dakota and Western Montana, North Dakota, I think maybe in Wyoming, and recently from Yellowstone Park. We still have one of the most intact native prairie ecosystems in the state, in an area called Snake Butte, which is that picture in the middle there with the buffalo herd below it. And now it is up to us to restore, preserve, and protect our native grasslands. I'll touch briefly on this project that I got associated with, and I know Wendy Velman is one of the participants in our group here. So with further ado, here goes. In 2019, or it might have been 18, Christina Eisenberg of the Society of Ecological Restoration, and through a partnership with our tribe, and Wendy Velman from the BLM office, and she's the lead botanist for Montana, they began developing a grassland restoration project. The project involved using the BLM assessment, AIM, which is the inventory monitoring and assessment method for assessing the condition of native grasslands. Project partners also included our Tribal Historic Preservation Program, cultural societies, and elders to ensure that traditional ecological knowledge, also called TEK, was incorporated into the grassland restoration project tasks. Like, for instance, in the mornings, we'd pray. We always do this cultural ceremony of praying. And when we're out on site, we offer tobacco to the Mother Earth for taking a specimen of plant if we choose to. And our elders are usually advise the program on things they want us to do and not what they don't want us to do. And if we're by any cultural sites, we have to stay away from them to protect them. But anyway, the project's main goal was to incorporate and develop a fellows program for our young at-risk students to participate in the project. With our high suicide rates here in Fort Belknap among our youth and the high unemployment rate, this project gives our students pride and a sense of accomplishment. I just can't say enough good things about this program, but for sake of time, I just have to go fast here. One of the most interesting projects that came out of this is the native seed collecting. In the lower left-hand corner, that's part of the group, but they're called native seed angels. Wendy Velman often termed them as. This will increase our tribe's resiliency by using the native seeds to restore our own prairies from past and future impacts associated with climate change. A photo in the middle are bags full of several varieties of native seed that has been collected by student fellows. And I might also want to point out that even in the face of drought, our native area where we collected the seeds were growing pretty were pretty abundant, and they were thriving and full of vigor in this area, whereas the surrounding areas, the plants didn't do very well. In the lower right-hand corner is the fellows, the field techs, and the Shrubbeck Historic Preservation Office manager here, Mike Blackwolf, Dan Work, and the gentleman standing there is one of the fellows that are working on a grassland project, and the guy below him on the right is another one. That's Tyrus Brocky. This is I can't remember the names right now, but this is me down here sitting here, and then another field tech named Caden Ashdown. And this is the last slide of this grassland project, but this is one of our elders, Donovan Archambault, also a Harvard graduate. He's selecting a site for this project. So he goes out there, blesses the site, and offers tobacco. We pray. And then the rest of our group here, seen in here, is Wendy Vellman, the BLM. There's me behind her. And these are the field techs and fellows. This is Haley, the boy, Tyrus, Gary Work. This is our tribal councilman. Also instrumental in the success of the project, Warren Morin. And his last name is File Steel. And then there's Dan Work and Caden again. But this is the Botany Blitz, the books that we use, the students use to help identify the plants. And the picture on the lower right here is of a species. It shows the amount of seeds collected by these native species. And you can see down here, it says exceeds 10,000 seeds requirement. So they were highly successful last year, even in the face of drought, collecting these native plant seeds. Some of the plants were the native western wheatgrass, blue grama, prairie June grass, needle and thread, blue bunch wheatgrass, and sandberg. And I can't get this thing off the bottom of my but down here, can you guys see that website to go to get more information on the West Grassland Restoration Project here in
Yes,
Fort
we can
Belknap?
see it.
Okay, because I see a big menu or something down here blocking it. But yeah, please go to that link if you're interested to learn more about our grassland restoration program here in Fort Belknap. And we also got a noxious weed plant that I ain't touching on in this presentation, but these are our tribe's priority species of plants that we highly value for cultural and ceremonial reasons. We use June berries here as a food staple in our ceremonies. We make soup out of it, or we mix it with dry meat, jerky. And this is a peppermint. We had a invited ethnobotanist visit us last summer, and she gave us a pretty good point of view that we don't need books and manuals to study some of our native plants if you just use your senses, like smell. If you come to a wetland site and you use your senses, you can pretty much know that there's peppermint in the area. It's from its aroma. And this is and I got to mention her name. Her name is Roz Lapierre. She's a ethnobotanist from the Blackfeet tribe in Browning. This also is a choke cherry. We crush these, we dry and crush them, and we mix them with meat, and it's called pemmican. And we use it for other, we use the branches and the seed for other things that we do. And this is sage down here in the lower. We burn it and we use it in ceremonies. This is a wild turnip, and here's the plant for it right here. But it's a highly prized diet food staple for our tribes. We mix it into soups and other dishes. And I'll lightly touch on our college. Our tribal college also has a strong priority in first foods. They have a garden, a greenhouse, and medicinal flower beds. And in the summertime, after everything gets bloomed and going, they have tours, and they let us come through there, and they talk about each plant and the healing properties that they offer, and the dietary part too. And here's a picture of the greenhouse, and this is tobacco back here in the background behind my sister. This is Cheryl Morales. She works for the college, and she's a part ethnobotanist herself. And after the tobacco is grown, they let elders, just only the elders, they come in here and get to pick the tobacco. And on this side are pumpkins for the Head Start kids. And here's the medicinal flower beds. I think this is peppermint and other varieties of some medicinal plants that our tribe uses. And here's the garden. It goes quite a bit back, has squash, cabbage, peppers, corn, potatoes. Here's a close-up of the tobacco right here. Extreme weather events and disasters. My adaptation plan covers this, but I'm just going to give you a few slides of this. Our Emergency Disaster Services Committee comes together in times of extreme weather events and disasters, and we coordinate with local, state, and federal agencies and use the most up-to-date data available, such as from the NRCS stream data, FEMA, USGS, NOAA, their data and graphs, the National Weather Service, the Montana Drought Monitor, which I'm part of, we report weekly to each other on the status of our drought here in Montana. The NRCS Culture and Climatic Data Base, get information from, and National Integrated Drought Information Service and other regional climate hubs. Here's a poster I generated from that data I just talked to you about. In 2011 and 2013, we had some historic floods come through our area. And these graphs show the river level. And there's a FEMA map on the side that the dark colors shows the flood zone, zone A. And it was completely inundated when we had our flood. It was even outside of that area. But here's our environmental office where it sits, is about right there where my cursor is on my slide. So we're really close. And here's another graph from the Hydrologic Prediction Service at NOAA showing the fast rise in the river level, and it almost reached the all-time record. It was just under a foot from reaching it. And here's an aerial photo from Google Earth Maps that I printed that shows where the pump house was, and it almost got flooded out from the flood. The river was still within the banks in this picture, but it did come out later on. How am I doing for time?
We are running a little bit low on time, so if you just want to kind of zoom through these last slides,
Okay.
we'd love to hear about it.
Climate change impacts drought. Currently, we're going through our second year in the worst drought on record, brought on by no snowpack and no spring precipitation, or very little. Our native plants and wildlife were affected. Water resources dried up. Cows and calves had to be sold, and hay had to be shipped in. Our agriculture was hit hard, not only from that, but from grasshopper epidemic. You can see how stunted the native grasses were in this area. Maybe 2 inches at best. So they grew, and they already went dormant at the beginning of June. Also, our grassland restoration project also observed out in the field in the Snake Butte area that some native plants matured 5 to 6 weeks ahead of time, which is interesting to know. Here's the current drought monitor from last week, showing in the red where the drought is the hardest hit in Montana. And our reservation is right about here in the middle where that cursor is. This is one of our perennial streams last year that actually dried up. And all the range cattle that were in these units were slowly getting herded up in transported back down to the river valley where there's more water available. But yeah, the livestock that was in the area, they would go to these pooled up areas and still were able to get water. And water tanks had to be developed, and water had to be trucked in for the sake of the livestock. This is another picture of the range in poor condition, and there's a small well right there where these few range livestock are. Wildfires. In recent years, we had some fires, and this one was in 2017. It was called the July Fire. It was on the southern end of the reservation, and it quickly got out of hand. Backburning saved it. These fires down below here are from backburning, and it just got rid of some of the vegetation before the main fire came to it. We had a major fire in 1936 from a historic fire that burned over half of our timber. So that's the main reason our tribe's fire management department controls burns to reduce fire risk. Last year, we had a major fire in our mountains again, but on the northern flank of the Little Rocky Mountains. This is the Rocky Mountains, and this is the northern flank where the fire was. We have a tribal community here called Hayes, and another one behind this guy's hand called Lodgepole. And right where his hand was is where the effort was to stop the fire. So we had these large tanker planes you see in this picture flying overhead, dropping tardant. And this is what it looked like after the fire. A bunch of scarred land with mosaics of vegetation it jumped over. I'll touch on one of my projects I'm working on, the Little Rockies Forest Resilience Project. Melly Ruling, Deputy Director, and Rebecca Waters.
Dennis, if you're okay, would you mind if we moved on to the next speaker?
What?
Would you mind if we moved on to the next speaker? Thank you so much, Dennis. We are just trying to keep some time at the end for questions. And if anybody has questions for Dennis, please put them in the chat. Wendy put some very polite, kind words talking about how awesome Dennis is. So,
okay.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. We are going to move on to Joe Swanson. He is from Boulder County Parks and Open Space in Colorado. Again, thank you to all of our presenters.
All right, let's see. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, and then let me go to slideshow and from the beginning. All right, and we can see that. All right, so I'm Joe Swanson. I'm the senior wheat specialist here at Boulder County, and we've been doing a lot of work with indaziflam, or Bayer product labeled Rejuvra. It just received the name Rejuvra in 2020 after it passed a grazing label review and is now acceptable for use on grazed lands. It's got a 0-day grazing restriction. As many of you know, this is a lot of what our front range land can look like out here. Totally inundated with cheatgrass. It creates a whole host of problems, least of which is basically just shutting down ecological resources and services across these sites. That last little statement there, a cost of doing nothing, I'm hopeful to show you the value of doing something with a lot of the projects that we've done with Rejuvra across the site. So as many of you probably know, indaziflam is a root biosynthesis inhibitor. It's a pre-germination herbicide. In my world, for this product, it just means it needs to be on the ground prior to seed deposition every June, July, August from cheatgrass, downy brome, Japanese brome, and in some cases feral wild rye here in Boulder County. So with that on the ground, when the seed lands on the ground and starts to germinate in later fall after some moisture events, the seed will go ahead and germinate, but it is not able to successfully establish roots into the soil as they take up some of the herbicide, breaks down the ability to make root structures, and that seed basically then just dies off. We have seen tremendous control in the first year. Downy brome in all kinds of studies has been highly sensitive to very low rates of indaziflam in the soil, which probably helps us understand significantly why most of the product is gone after about 2 years. In the second year, I think there's less than 5% of the product left on the ground, and we're still seeing great control of downy brome and Japanese brome in these situations.
Oh, Joe, are you meaning to flip through your slides, or are you meaning to stay on this first one?
Oh, am I still on? Oh, shoot, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it looks like you're not in presentation mode, so if you just want to do that.
Yeah, let me
Should be under slideshow.
yeah, let me
Yeah.
I got a bar up here in the way. I can't quite see. Come back here, and then move that down here, and then slideshow, and then I did from beginning, but I didn't do present online.
From current slide.
From current slide. Oh, yep. Sorry, is that better?
Yes, it'll load for us in a second. But yes, thank you
Okay.
so much.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so this is the slide that are you seeing pretty field of flowers on the right and indaziflam on the left?
Yeah, so it looks like it's a little bit late for us. There might be some connectivity issues, but we are seeing
Okay.
The second slide.
Okay.
Or third slide.
So anyway, we are seeing tremendous control in the second year, even with about 5% of the product left in the soil. So it's amazing what that is actually then doing for the remaining remnant native populations that are in the soil. Here you can see what resulted. I think this is Rabbit Mountain, and this application was done in early March, and this is around June or July of the same year here on the right. So I tend to think of indaziflam as an ecological restoration tool from many of the things that we're seeing it do on the ground in real-time applications. These are not photoshopped. These are all pictures where these plants were released in great numbers once the blight of cheatgrass was removed from the surface. We attribute a lot of that to the fact that cheatgrass is utilizing most of the resources, the minerals, moisture, nutrients, all of that stuff is being bound up by cheatgrass through the winter months. It's highly established by the time our natives want to start coming out of the ground. So they're basically living in a drought state at that point in time. So once we can get rid of the cheatgrass on the surface, this is a lot of what we're seeing in result.
Joe, sorry to cut you off again.
Yes.
You have really pretty slides, so I want to make sure everybody can see them.
Okay.
Would you mind just clicking escape?
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Awesome. And now you can just go through the slides manually.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think we can see them now.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I apologize, everybody. So the recent study or actually recent data that we collected and wanted to kind of present on was when, as you would assume or be concerned with, as we were as well, when you're talking about an annual or a short-lived perennial or biennial species of invasive plants being controlled by this herbicide, what does that mean for our native species in those same physiology types? And so this was not taken lightly. We did have a lot of concern over this, but as you may know or may not know, when you're walking across a lot of these cheatgrass sites, it's hard to tell what actually was there prior to the cheatgrass. Many of the plants that we are finding today, we did not find in the checks. We did not find in those sites when we pre-walked them. We could just tell that there was some remnant population of our native species out there. So this was to kind of combine all of that data together and really take a look at the 1 to 5 year after treatment of these plants, the diversity and the number of plants that we were finding. So as you can see here, the mean species diversity there on the right, 2019, 2021, a steady increase across those sites, across all sites in native species diversity. One of the things I do want to point to here is that in 2021, we had an exceptionally high rainfall year. It was the wettest year on record, or start to a year on record, since 1983, I do believe. So we did actually see a lot of perennials start to come out in our checks, as well, as there was enough moisture to go around, and they were able to surpass the cheatgrass that kind of stood in their way. Plants that we did look at here: the triennials, biennials, monocarpics, and the short-lived perennials. So this is just another look at 31 total species that were found across these sites. These were all paired sites. There's a check on each site. And as you can see, each year led to a greater increase in the number of total species that were being found on these sites. So the question is are we inhibiting a lot of our native annuals and biennials and short-lived perennials with the herbicide? And it's starting to look like there could potentially still be some, but we're not necessarily seeing it. And as I say, when we walk those sites and they're covered in cheatgrass, it's really hard to know what should have even been there to begin with. This slide here is, I think, very interesting. It's very telling. If you look at the Rock Creek Site 1, this is only 4 months after treatment. So this treatment would have been done early March. It would have been while natives were all dormant. And it probably had about 8 ounces of glyphosate in there to kill off any growing cheatgrass at that time. So here you can see, in 4 months later, plants that were not even found in the check are suddenly escaping the soil profile and able to appear on the landscape. So we're not quite sure what's leading to some of this, why our natives are ahead of the game with indaziflam versus the invasive biennials. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But as you can see, as you go across the site, 3 years after and 5 years after, there just continues to be a steady increase in a lot of these short-lived species across those sites. We did a little bit of geo-referencing of points and their plants. And as you can see here, the density, not only did we have an increase in diversity, but the density of plants greatly increased after control of cheatgrass on these sites. Once again, this is, I believe, Hall Ranch. I'm not quite sure. Let's see, which one is this? Oh, this is Culp Open Space. Culp Open Space has a high diversity of plants, about 147 different species that was discovered on a study here done a few years ago. They went out multiple times throughout the year, throughout the growing season. Somewhere in that neighborhood of 157 to 160 plants, I believe, that they found. As you can see, the response to the treated areas versus the stagnation of the control areas, species just continue to increase across those sites in their density. Here is Indian Mountain Open Space. Kind of the same story again as you take a look across these sites. So if you look at sleepy catchfly, I'm assuming the zero was in the, well, throughout the entirety of the study. So not finding any on that site at the beginning or throughout, but yet we still had 6 plants encountered as the study moved along. So then we can also take a look at some of our species of concern, or more rare species that we find across our Boulder County open spaces. As you can imagine, this is a bit of a concern when you're trying to go ahead and treat some of these areas. And now we're talking about rarer species of concern. What are we going to do to those? Are we going to totally eliminate them or wipe them out by using a herbicide? Excuse me. As you can see here, indaziflam has actually been releasing more and more of those species across the site. It is interesting. We'll see quite a change in the first year, but it's almost like a great big steam engine trying to get its steam up and get its wheels a turning. Over time, as we start seeing more ecological services being returned to those systems, more and more plants do seem to just start emerging emerging in landscape. This is one that we really kind of exciting for this one, I guess. That we really started taking a look at this one just because it was one plant we hadn't really seen a lot of on this site. This is up on Hall Ranch, pleated gentian. And in 2019 on this site, there was only 5 plants. And as you can see, over the next 2 years, the plants just really exploded across that site. And some of that may have to do with the climate change, or I say climate change, the weather patterns that we were getting, as in 2021 was extremely wet. I'm not sure what it prefers as far as weather and temperatures and all of that. But in 2021, we had a huge explosion of that across this site, all found in the treated areas. So kind of a fun one to take a look at there. And then
Joe, I think we are going to move on to our next presenter.
That's fine.
Again,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. No problem.
Yep. And any questions can go in the chat. And in case you guys didn't see, we are going to stay on, or the RISC folks at least will stay on if you guys want to ask or answer any questions after the noon deadline. All right. Okay, we are going to move on next to Aaron Flanders, who works with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Kansas Partners for Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you. So I see that.
Yeah, Joe, if you could stop sharing your screen. Great, thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get this. Okay, are you seeing the first slide?
Oh, yes, we are.
Is it the slide or the PowerPoint view?
It's the slide.
Okay, so Aaron Flanders, I'm with the Kansas Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. We are the private lands program for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a couple links there if you want to look at more information on our region or state of where we work. The Partners program is within all 50 states and U.S. territories. Today I'll be talking about some of our resource concerns in the state, their impacts, how we're addressing them, and just kind of let the pictures tell the story. I will warn you that this presentation was from a workshop, I believe, last week or so. I've been meeting myself coming and going, and I have not narrowed it down to 10 minutes. So I guess you'll have to cut me off when you want. So within Kansas, here's some of our resource concerns that we address. Kansas is over 97% privately owned, being a private land state. We work with a number of conservation partners to address these activities on their properties, providing resources like technical guidance and financial assistance to complete restoration and enhancement projects. So Kansas is the Great Plains, in the Great Plains, and it was developed through millions of years of fire, grazing, and climate. We have over 17 million acres of native prairie in the state, and it's one of the most altered ecoregions in the nation. So one thing that you may not be aware of are the unique wetland resources that we have in the bottleneck of the Central Flyway. For numerous species migrating through the middle of the continent here, their pathways will narrow up through this part of the nation, and there's critical links in their path during this north and south migration. Some of those here that I'm going to focus on today are in central Kansas, Quivira National Wildlife Refuge and Cheyenne Bottoms. They're critical stepping stones during the migration, part of the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, recognized as Ramsar wetlands of international importance, and important bird areas by Audubon. Just highlighting some of the species that utilize these areas are federally endangered whooping cranes, These are the last migratory flocks from Canada to the Gulf Coast. At one point down to 16 individuals and now approximately 500 through transmitter research been shown to be an extended use core area for their migration, critical habitat. Also, the federal threatened black rail is present in this area. So this is a area of greatest continental significance for migratory shorebirds and waterfowl in the region. Just one example of some of the shorebirds that come into this area. There's over 39 species of shorebirds that utilize these areas for migration, stopover points to rest and refuel, or some for breeding nesting grounds. Just once again, highlighting that this is a unique inland wetland habitat area for migratory birds. And here's a snapshot of what it looks like during migration. It's really raucous with the amount of cornucopia of waterfowl and shorebirds that come through this area. So today I'm going to be looking at sharing with you some of the impacts that we're addressing with tamarisk and Russian olive. These are phreatophytes, so they're adapted to growing in these areas of wetlands, high water tables. They like to keep their feet wet. They are introduced species from other parts of the globe, and they've been found to be highly invasive. So this is one ranch that we work on down in the Cimarron River, where back in the 1930s there were not any salt cedar or tamarisk present, and today there's over 1,000 acres in this highly productive sub-irrigated rangeland. So switchgrass, alkali sagaton, Indian grass, that can be highly productive for our livestock producers, and rare species like lesser prairie chicken that will utilize this area if the trees aren't present. So we have seen this vast increase in tamarisk and Russian olive within the state. The Kansas Forest Service is a great partner that's done some recent aerial surveys that is keeping us aware of where it's present and trying to keep up with trends over time. So in this part of the nation, so Kansas is pretty diverse. In the eastern part of Kansas, you might get 40 or more plus inches of precipitation a year, and then you go into central and it's around 20 inches, and then it goes out to 10 to 15, and your annual evaporation can actually be higher than precip. So any impacts on these wetland areas and our riparian hydrology functioning is a significant resource concern for us. So you can see in this picture, that's a dog hair thick stand of salt cedar that you would have to get on your hands and knees to crawl through. It's just really thick. So these aren't the only species. I want to highlight that tree encroachment within our native prairies and wetlands is happening at a rapid scale and speed with the cedar, hedge, locust, elm, and others. There's a rangeland analysis platform tool online that you can look at concerns about our biome-wide collapse of prairie habitat due to some of the impacts of tree encroachment within native prairie and some of our obligate grassland species that inhabit those. So quickly going over some of the impacts we're concerned about, it's a common ground concern for many of our stakeholders, whether it's carbon sequestration that we may not think about as much in prairies. They say within a teaspoon of soil, there's more microorganisms than people on the planet, and they have a vast capacity to store carbon. So we have all these different root structures of our forbs and grasses and this rhizosphere of microfauna that are capturing carbon, and it's trapped in that soil until unless it's plowed. So underground carbon storage, extremely important for our livestock producers. There's significant impacts on their forage production, then wildlife habitat, recreational uses, in our ecosystem services. So you can see in these pictures, not much is growing underneath the canopy of this salt cedar. They can actually increase salt concentrations within their leaves and stems, and then deposit them on the soil, increasing soil salinity. And then also the lower picture is eastern red cedar, similar impacts. Those are all the juniper berries underneath those trees. So we have impacts on our utilization of grazing, areas that the cattle won't utilize, and then forage loss. Our habitat for our shorebirds, like these American avocets, using these sandbars, are highly susceptible to this light-seeded tamarisk species, and then this heavier Russian olive can penetrate into otherwise healthy sub-irrigated herbaceous meadows, wetland areas, and are highly invasive. So again, major concerns about these same areas, open shorelines, moist soil that's used by species that I'd love to share more on here. So this is Rattlesnake Creek. It feeds into Quivira National Wildlife Refuge, where we've been focusing strategically a lot of our efforts to support their hydrological functioning. You can see there's not a lot of wildlife habitat along the riparian shoreline areas here. We're also concerned, again, about moist soil plant production that supports our migratory waterfowl that utilize the seeds and aquatic inverts in these areas. Also, stream geomorphology with increases in species like Phragmites, tamarisk, Russian olive. You know, our old riparian channels, oxbows, with the increase in sedimentation, can create disconnects between our riparian areas and then those wetland areas, depressional areas. So when we have overflow events, we don't capture as much water to slowly infiltrate back into the system. I'm going to skip forward. So where we've been strategically working upstream of Quivira, I'm going to share with you some of the techniques real quick that we've been utilizing, trying to work at contiguous scale to make areas more resistant and resilient to invasion and remove the invasive vector into that refuge. Working with numerous partners, this isn't a single effort. Each partner brings their own unique resources and capacity to the table to help us achieve more than any of us could on our own individually. So I just want to highlight them. Let's see. I'm going to play a couple quick videos, and then I'll probably just cut it off, even though I have some more information to share. Let's see. So I don't know if this video is coming through for everybody, but we've been extracting the roots of these, the lateral roots of these Russian olives with that tree extractor implement on the skid steer, and then stacking them. This area actually has a lot of sheet flow in this sub-irrigated meadow. So these trees will actually reroot and try to reestablish if we don't stack them. I'm going to go forward to some before and afters. So this is a before picture. That's what it looks like afterward. There's a big salt marsh in the background. This is a before picture. So those pictures were at the same location, and the restoration was at the same time as sandhill crane migration, so it coincided well, and it highlighted the utilization for our livestock producers as well as wildlife. So you can see this lateral root system within for Russian olive. We've also done some cut stump herbicide techniques. Works well unless you miss a stump. You can see how avid of a resprouter this species is. We always incorporate some follow-up herbicide applications. We've tested out some different treatments. Some of those are ongoing. This last fall with K-State University came out and tried out a number of different herbicides we could share in the future. If anybody's interested, get a hold of me. I'm going to skip forward here. Okay, I'm going to share a quick aerial view of Rattlesnake Creek. And if this is coming through, it's Rattlesnake Creek, tamarisk and eastern red cedar encroachment. K-State Polytechnic was flying some drones to try to do multispectral imaging, high resolution to pick out different tree species, signatures, and identify them invasive species on the landscape. So this project incorporated track hoe extraction, prescribed burning, prescribed grazing, follow-up herbicide applications. You can see how big these piles were after extraction. There's a big taproot on the tamarisk, so we're trying to pull out 14 to 18 inches of taproot. You can see on Rattlesnake Creek all these channels and oxbows. Again, I'm going to skip this. Has some good before and afters. I think I'm at the end of my time, so I can end here and let Matthew go next. I have some more information here, kind of showing regrowth after one growing season. You know, starting out with annuals, moving towards later successional stages, switchgrass and Indian grass in these areas.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. Sorry,
Sure.
I feel like turning on my camera is like the kiss of death a little bit. But we are going to move on to Matt. So we've got Matt Garrett from Johnson County Park and Recreation District in Kansas. So Matt, if you want to go ahead and share your screen. And again, thank you to all of our presenters.
All right, you got my slide?
Yes, we do.
All right, so I'm Matt Garrett with Johnson County Park and Recreation District. I wanted to thank Aaron for the work that he's doing. The Partners Program has helped us convert 500 plus acres of prairie in eastern Kansas, and the Kansas Forest Service has assisted us as well with the project I'm talking about today. So bush honeysuckle is disrupting woodlands across the Midwest. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's a perfect plant for this new landscape that climate change is providing. I manage about 8,700 acres in a rapidly developing suburban county, and bush honeysuckle is taking over, or has already taken over, the understories of almost every woodland deciduous forest across our landscapes here in Kansas City. Many of you may not know about it north of us. Did my slide advance there? It did not. There we go. All right, so we got bush honeysuckle. It's this large upright shrub. It's allelopathic. It has an extended growing season. It competes for all moisture, massive seed production. It leaves out, you know, the leaf out is before all native plants. It aggressively resprouts if not treated with herbicide, and it breaks down multiple levels of all ecosystem processes. It's an absolute monster that we've been dealing with in Johnson County. So we were able to come together with a comprehensive plan that kind of assessed all the weaknesses we had across all of our parkland. And it outlined the threats to the natural areas. And an interesting thing was that the public actually, when they responded with hundreds of comments, as they hated bush honeysuckle, and not necessarily for the reasons that we dislike it and try to manage it, but they felt unsafe even being in the natural areas due to how closed off and tunnel-like many of the trail systems had become. And so we were able to piece together a significant amount of funding through our public outreach that put together a 10-year resource plan, helping us tackle this bush honeysuckle problem in the county. So we were excited to be able to make our parks a little more resilient. And we kind of just started the program roughly 3 years ago. We decided to break up some really high quality priority areas where we've already put a lot of natural resource investment, and knew that on the front end with staff and contractors it's going to be really expensive, forecasted some costs in the, you know, in the middle of the project, and things taper off with the long-term management. So we started putting some numbers together and figured out how we were going to tackle removing bush honeysuckle from as many of our deciduous forests as we could. And the real question is, how are we going to get this work done? Kansas City doesn't really have a strong restoration ethos. It's not something you see like in the upper Midwest or Colorado. Large scale bush honeysuckle removal hasn't been done in the Kansas City area. So we were kind of on our own, looking to other regions for a little bit of guidance. And so we were able to come up with some conservation contractors on 5-year contracts, allowing them to continue working without rebidding. we have an amazing program working with local ecotype seed and a local nonprofit where we knew we had to get as much local seed as possible. We created with one of our seed contractors, a special woodland 14 species blend that would help us reseed a lot of those, low C value species to gain us a little bit of traction and take care of the massive disruption that the bush honeysuckle removal does in some of these really disrupted woodlands. And so we're trying to keep our disturbance to a minimum once we've destroyed all the bush honeysuckle, and be as cautious as possible on the site, and then slowly begin reintroducing our higher value species as we push through towards the end of the 10-year period. One problem with this work is we have in the suburban area a white-tailed deer situation where some of our park sites have had upwards of 200 deer a square mile. We had a park that was pushing 600 deer at one point. So through some management efforts, some of the deer densities come down, allowing for some of the success of these plant species to take off once they've been seeded. But the deer management continues to be a problem with a lot of our restoration work. And so many of these sites, if it's high quality, the bush honeysuckle once removed, the whole area bounces back with some light prescribed fire, and you can't even tell the work's been done. And then in our lower quality areas that have seen 30, 40, 45 years of bush honeysuckle invasion, there's absolutely no seed bank left. And that's where we're almost looking at a completely blank slate. And some botanists and I have been trying to figure out, how do we take these kind of quasi-successional woodlands that have no functioning understory and slowly bring them back? And so we're bringing in a large amount of our native forbs, understory grasses, and began planting trees while keeping the deer management, ongoing, and then trying to deal with some of the herbicide damage that you may see on some of the hardwood trees as we do the work. KC Wildlands is our partner in a lot of these projects. They're a nonprofit taking care of all the remnant plant communities left on both sides of the Kansas City state line. So we're on the Kansas side, but we also have remnant plant communities on the Missouri side, and our team of volunteers collects seed across about a 9-county region. And so we kind of ignore the state line and everybody works together, which is pretty awesome when sometimes those state boundaries stop work. And so our seed volunteers get these targeted lists of woodland species we're after, like river oats, many of the wild rye, our woodland goldenrods, beak grain grass, things like that. And so we send our volunteers across the entire community, and then we bring everything back to our seed processing barn and make sure that these things get out to the correct restoration site later in the season. The long-term management is going to be prescribed fire, looking at creeping woodland prescribed fires, not our large prairie flame fronts that we put on. Additional spot spraying with our staff, contractor visits, as needed. And our real goal is to continue to just put this seed down year after year until it takes. So the future of the program, in 3 years, we've cleared 525 acres. We felt pretty good about that, and we're kind of at a tipping point. We're going to make sure we're managing the land that we've already restored before we move forward. Our long-term monitoring is starting this year. And something we're seeing is how climate change is disrupting our seeding planting efforts, that we're getting these massive rainstorms that are just knocking seed and bare root plantings out of the ground, and accessing the site has even become problematic depending on which site we're at, that these massive rainstorms that come out of nowhere with periods of drought in between have made this restoration work a little more complicated, which I'm sure others are facing as well. And so as a county level park manager, myself and others haven't been incorporating a lot of climate data or projections into what we're doing. And I'm really excited about what this group is doing and how we can pull that into the restoration work that people are doing at the city and county levels across the Midwest. And so this is a pretty interesting project for us, and I hope we can replicate what we're doing with all the cities across our region and provide them our bidding documents and some of our volunteer outreach scenarios where some of these other communities can begin to tackle this problem, not just on our specific land. And we're looking at providing a grant program where we can provide funding for additional communities to begin removing the bush honeysuckle adjacent to all of the land we're managing through Johnson County Park District. So I tried to roll pretty quickly, and I am done.
Great, thank you so much, Matt.